Hello, my name is Gary Gomes. I'm delighted to be talking to you here from Greater New Bedford Cable Television. I'm here every week talking with you about astrology topics and astrology topics about the planets and the zodiac and how they affect us on a personal and a global level. I also dip into, my specialty is Vedic astrology, but I'll also be working in some things like a discussion of tarot towards the end of this particular show, and also a discussion of world events. So essentially, one of the reasons I'm wearing red, I just want to point out that I'm wearing a different outfit than I normally do, and I'm wearing red today mainly in celebration of Mars finally moving out of Cancer and into Leo, which we've all been praying for the past few weeks. We had all those horrible shootings over the past few weeks. It's largely debilitated Cancer, especially if it's aspected by a planet like Jupiter, which tends to amplify or blow up things, no pun intended. It tends to make, and again, it wasn't really a pun. It was just an unfortunate choice of words. Essentially, every planet. So Jupiter expands things. So every planet has an action. Every planet has. So this is getting back to the basics of astrology. But Mars is an energetic planet. It tends to cause a lot of energy, a lot of activity. If it's in a sign like Cancer, which it is in Vedic astrology, it tends to seethe with anger because it's in water. It doesn't like watery signs. If it's in Scorpio, it's okay because it kind of likes that energy, but in most watery signs, it doesn't do that well. And essentially, we had a whole conjunction of planets in Sun, meaning Sun, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, all in Cancer, which has to do with the home, has to do with the public places. Mars was also aspecting Libra. Indian astrology or Vedic astrology tends to throw these very set aspects in a chart. So essentially, Mars always aspects 7, 8, and 4 signs away. So Cancer to Libra is 4 signs. And Libra is essentially the sign connected with the marketplace. So that explains what happened in El Paso, definitely. And the fact that these things are covered by the media, a large component of what gets media coverage is covered by a strong Mercury. A fellow astrologer of mine pointed out that actually there were 2 shootings on one day, and the gentleman's name is Stephen Stuckey. He's a very good astrologer. And he pointed out there were actually a series of 4 shootings, but the first shooting that happened around July, it was believed around July 26th, happened in New York City, and it was a mob-related shooting in which 9 people were shot and 1 person killed. And it didn't get that much coverage, but it did show up in the news. But these events are more media, I hate to use the word friendly, but they're more media-friendly events because you have a bunch of innocent people being attacked, and you have it being done in a very public theater. And especially hearing about 2 shootings in one day is enough to make anybody sit up and pay attention, right? So Cancer indicates, Cancer is a sign of the general public, the general environment. Libra is a sign of the marketplace. So we have this large marketplace. Now, Mercury being involved is also really important. And I'm just going back to the September 11th bombings in 2001. And Mercury was, when the planes hit in New York, Mercury was exalted in the first house. So Mercury is the overall planet that has to do with the media and media coverage. So there was no way anybody, I mean, it was a huge event. I'm not saying anybody would have missed the coverage, but Mercury tends to spread coverage much more strongly than other planets do. So you can have an event happen at the other side of the world. Like, let's say there were earthquakes in Turkey just yesterday, and that barely registered a blip in the United States. And I'm not necessarily saying it should, because it's a Turkish issue, or you can have events happen like tsunami, earthquakes in Indonesia. That's number one, it's not local, but number two, our media isn't going to be particularly interested in covering it because it's not local. And the fact that the sun is involved indicates the government's going to get involved in it. So anytime you see the sun with Mercury, and you have these clusters of planets, there's an entire system called Vedic astrology, which reads, which essentially looks, and also La Kitab, which essentially combine planets and give significations connected with those planets. That's a very Saturnian kind of a combination in both those systems. It's very restrictive. And what happens is, it's really, when you have clustered planets, it's usually never a good sign. That's not really saying that every time planets go into one sign, but I can remember just off the top of my head, we had a cluster in the May 2000 stock market crash. We had a cluster of planets, and like a really strong cluster in May of 2000. We also had strong clusters, and one of the reasons people were very worried about the Rahu-Ketu axis in this year in Gemini and Sagittarius was because we had a similar, although not identical, axis in the September 11th events. So a lot of these things so astrologers look for patterns, and they try to build meaning into patterns. That's one of our jobs. And so we're looking for patterns of these energies. So getting back to the point about wearing the red shirt, Mars is finally coming out of its nastiest or most difficult sign. It's in a nakshatra called Ashlesha, which is it's a serpent nakshatra. It's not inherently evil, but the terminal point of Ashlesha has been known as a sign that's shared by a lot of people who take many lives, like people who have Ashlesha, like late degree Ashlesha moons, tend to be people who are involved in serial killings and in all sorts of nasty events. And so, and when you think about shootings like these are really these are frenzy killings, but they're serial killings. They're essentially, so you take out a series of people, you take out as many people as you can, and they're classified as frenzy killings, but basically they're serial killings and they're suicidal. And there are 3 points, excuse me, I'm very sorry about that. There are 3 points in the chart which are considered to be very inauspicious points. One is the end of Cancer, which is where the Ashlesha nakshatra is, but really the very last few degrees. We're not talking about the entire. Ashlesha goes all the way back to around 17 degrees of Cancer. So we're really talking about the last 2 to 3 degrees of Ashlesha being difficult. The end of the first 2 nakshatras in Scorpio and the beginning of Sagittarius, and this is in Vedic astrology, and the end of Pisces in Western astrology. Those are considered to be really difficult points in the chart, just traditionally. So whenever you see planets cluster around that area, and Jupiter was also in Scorpio as well, so it really added fuel to the fire a little bit. Although Jupiter's influence is normally benign, the fact that it expands things can make events more profound, more telling. So we have those events. As I'm speaking to you, it's August 9th. Essentially, Mars is transiting out of Cancer, is slowly moving into Leo. That's a better sign for it. Mars, funnily enough, gets is considered a really good planet for Cancer rising signs. So if a person's a Cancer rising or a Cancer sun, Mars typically does good things for it, but when it sits in Cancer, when Mars sits in Cancer, it doesn't feel comfortable. It feels like it needs to take action. So it's a warrior planet. It has a lot of energy to it. And Cancers and a warrior's never really comfortable at home. You don't want a warrior in your backyard, let's say, or as a neighbor, unless he's there to protect you. But warriors or soldiers' main mission is to not only to defend but also to attack. And we often forget that particular aspect of being a warrior. Warriors are trained to attack. So essentially, I'm looking at the chart right now, and we have a Jupiter-Moon conjunction, which is pretty good. The Moon is in a good nakshatra, and we'll talk about the nakshatras in subsequent shows. But the nakshatras are really important. There are essentially what they would call two zodiacs in Indian astrology. And there are also divisional charts, which I think I mentioned before. Divisional charts are essentially derivations of the main birth chart, and you can get a lot of detail from a chart from that. So that's why these readings I give you on these days are meant to be general overviews for your sign, not substitutes for a real reading. And you don't need to go to me as an astrologer, but if you want a really detailed reading, if you have some big events coming up or something you're worried about or something you're looking forward to, and you want to get a really good job done on it, talk to a person who does astrology for a living or somebody who's proficient in the field. Don't take these forecasts because these aren't going to be as accurate as you need them to be. Okay, so and an actual birth chart is a lot of work, you know. So I'm not saying that to defend my occupation, but basically it is. And there are a lot of components you just can't get from the kind of spot readings I give you. So essentially Mars has changed signs. That's great. And we're going to have an entire cluster of planets changing signs within about a week. And I mentioned this in the last broadcast. And so by around the 17th or so, everything will be into Leo. Now that's both good, but again, we have a cluster effect. You know, we have a bunch of planets in Leo. So what does that mean? Well, it's going to mean attacks on governments, governments under greater scrutiny. It does not necessarily mean your favorite or least favorite politician getting thrown out of office or staying in office. A lot of it has to do with family legacies, family traditions. You know, essentially the passing on of power. And Leo also has to do a great deal with prosperity. So it should be contrary to what we've been experiencing so far, at least certain signs have been experiencing so far. It'll start to be like a little breaking open of opportunities for people because there'll be more optimism, there'll be more happiness, there'll be attacks on kings and queens, but there'll also be a lot more career focus with these signs moving into Leo than we have seen over the past few months. So this is not necessarily a bad transit, but again, there's a cautionary note here because when planets transit all to one sign, it's only when they break up they start to do a little bit better. But basically when they're all in one sign and the only other active planet really in the chart, the moon's changing signs every 2.5 days. So it's moving through. And once every day it changes nakshatras roughly. You know, it changes the signs within the signs. And Saturn and Ketu are still staying pretty much, they're close to right on top of each other. Saturn's a little bit further back than Ketu is right now. And they'll go stationary direct around August 21st. And that will bring a lot of debts or things you have to pay for into really tight focus. So if you've been lucky in terms of avoiding debts or avoiding obligations, that'll sort of bring it together. And then there'll be a spread out of the planets starting in September, where you'll start to see Jupiter move a little closer to Sagittarius, And that'll be both good and bad. So I would say between October and January will be kind of a tense period because you'll have a Saturn-Jupiter conjunction. And usually Saturn-Jupiter conjunctions start economic problems or economic issues. And we're looking at not really a trade war, but at least a period of like around 3 months of like testy relations with China. And then Saturn moves into Capricorn, which is its own sign. So that'll stabilize things quite a bit more than they have been over the past year and a half, 2 years or so. It'll also take a lot of pressure off Gemini risings and Sagittarius risings because those particular signs have been really hit hard over the past couple of years because of both Rahu and Ketu and Saturn being involved with the signs. If we're looking sign to sign, basically, and I just want to look at and see if there are any major events coming up. So if we have, forgive me for 1 second. Okay, so we have a world map, and the most difficult areas seem to be, from this chart, seem to be, again, Ohio down through Georgia in the United States, Brazil, especially the northwest part of Brazil. There's also a Mars line in Iraq, next to Kashmir, actually, interestingly enough. So I wouldn't be surprised if violence breaks out in Kashmir. And also there's a Saturn line in what used to be called, well, essentially, I won't say what used to be called, essentially in the area around Cambodia or Khmer and Russia. Russia is going to have problems over the next year or so. That's not going to go away anytime soon. And the other trouble point I can see is it really doesn't affect anyone, but maybe some bad activity around Alaska, maybe weather problems. But these are temporary transits, and I'm not putting a lot of weight on these. Africa also will